Well, greetings. Robert Locke here. Thanks for hanging out with us today. This particular short video deals with one of the myths that are common in the property management business. And the myth goes something like this. There's no way, there are no circumstances under which I can pass the tenant's personal information on to the owner, right? Well, if you ask most people in the property management world that question, they would beat their hand on the desk and say, absolutely not. There are no conditions under which we can pass the tenant's personal, private, confidential information over to the owner. And I've heard that for years. You've heard that in workshops for years. But if you take a moment and really examine that carefully, kind of pick it apart, you discover that there is a way you can do it. There's a way you can do it safely and not get in any kind of trouble with any of the laws that govern this business. So hang out with us for about 4 seconds and I'll describe to you and kind of unpack this and show you how you can do that. Okay, we've thrown out a challenge that kind of suggests there is a way that you can pass information about the tenant over to the owner, not get in any trouble. And there is a way. We're going to talk through that. And I'll kind of lay that out because here's one of the problems. If you get an investor group to come talk to you and they're going to bring you 300 or 500 or 1,000 houses, one of the things that for sure is they're going to want to see the tenant's information and make their own decision as to whether or not to approve or deny them. And you can do that. It's perfectly okay as long as you cross all your T's, dot all your I's, and do it by the book. So what does doing it by the book look like? Let's walk through it. Clearly, it can be done safely. Now, there are some dangers and some warnings and some cautions. You've got to do it very surgically, but it certainly can be done. So let's talk first about owners and what their opinion is. Owners that think they should have access. Owners have this idea that since it's my house, I should make the decisions about the house. The authority all rests with me. I'm in the driver's seat, and you'll hear owners constantly say, give me the information of the tenant so that I can make the decision about approval and denial. Secondly, owners have their own ideas about who is qualified. We've had owners over the years that have an 850 or an 800 credit score, and if somebody only has a 650 credit score, they want to turn them down. Or if they haven't been on the job for less than 10 years, they want to turn them down. Owners have prejudices against certain nationalities, against people living together that are not married, all kinds of things, crazy things that owners will do. But owners have opinions, and they want to decide, and they want to take that authority and pull it back away from you and make their own decision. And then lastly, large investor groups have funding requirements governing this issue. If you've got an investor group that's funded by a Wall Street capital market, they've gone to a lawyer in New York, paid him $500 an hour to kind of lay out what the requirements are. And one of those requirements often is the capital group or the person doing the investing must pull the trigger and make the decisions on qualifying guidelines and whether or not an application is approved or denied. So owners have opinions about these things. So let's kind of turn the page and look at what the requirements are and who really governs this, because you certainly don't. Your real estate commission doesn't. The owner doesn't. There's some kind of big laws here that we have to consider. And the big one is the Fair Credit Reporting Act. Now, there are some things in this act that govern how you, who might be able to pull tenants' private information, have to handle that information and what the rules and regulations are. So we're going to look at some of them. One of them is that you can pass their credit information on to someone else if you get their permission. Now, if you've been at this a while, or you use our form, you can have it as part of the application that the tenant gives permission to pass the information over to the owner. You can have it in a separate email. You can have it in a separate document somewhere. But as long as you get the tenant's permission to pass their personal information on to the owner, you've satisfied step one of these requirements. But there are more. Let's keep unwinding this. Secondly, you must transfer it through a secure transfer method. Now, it's mandated. So, can you scan it and send it to the owner? Probably not. If you have a secure email, then you certainly have taken step 2 in transferring that information. But you can't just scan it. You might be able to fold it up and put it in an envelope and mail it to them. You might be able to go hand it to them. But as far as scanning it and sending it to the owner, the only way you can do that is through a secure email. So that's kind of step 2. Let's look at step 3. Step 3 is they must have the permission. The owner must have proper viewing and storage is mandated by the Act. Now, the Act says that the tenant's personal material, if received by you, must be kept under 3 different levels of security. And what they actually do is the storage inspection and approval is required. So if you're going to pull tenant information, then the tenant screening company or the credit bureau is going to send somebody to your office and do a physical inspection to make sure that you've got a lock on the front door, maybe a security system, maybe the door of the office storage room has a lock, maybe the filing cabinet has a lock. So they will actually physically come to the office. They could physically go to your owner's office, especially if your owner is a large investor. If the investor wants to receive this information, there's an inspection that has to be done, there's an approval process that has to be done, and then the Fair Credit Reporting Act also says that material must be stored for 3 years. So we're kind of going through, it's not a matter of you can't do it, it's a matter of if you want to do it, there are some requirements. So let's keep talking through some of them. Who really governs this? The tenant screening provider has some rules. If you're going to one of the national tenant screening companies, you signed a terms of agreement or terms of use. One of the things you as a property manager did was you agreed in that terms of use that if the tenant screening company provides you tenant's personal information, you agree in their relationship with them not to pass it on to anybody else. You know why? Because they can get in trouble if who you pass it to manages it improperly. So you can do it, but you've got to get the tenant screening company you use to approve that you do it. Okay? Let's go a little further. You can't pass information on to another. That you will read that language in the terms of use with your tenant screening company. Okay? And we have current litigation going on in Atlanta right now where one of our better property managers had a tenant move in and they moved out in 2 months. Had nothing to do with the quality of tenant. The tenant was a good tenant. They got a divorce and things just crashed and burned and the house went vacant. Well, now the owner is suspicious of the property manager's ability to qualify and select good tenants. So the owner has asked the manager for a copy of the tenant's information. And of course, good managers, knowing what the rules are, say, no, I can't give that to you. You trusted me, you relied on me. You can sue me for malpractice. You can come after me for doing a bad job. You can terminate me, but I won't pass the information over to you. And that's probably the smart thing to do. That's what most of us do. But it doesn't mean you have to do it that way. Okay? So let's continue on with this conversation. The Fair Credit Reporting Act, it goes something like this. If the owner or manager violates and there's a civil action, it allows the lawyer to name the owner, the property manager, the tenant screening provider in that lawsuit. In other words, the Fair Credit Reporting Act allows the attorney representing the tenant who is suing for violation of Fair Credit Reporting Act, he can rope into that conversation the owner who received the information, the property manager who sent him the information, and the tenant screening company for not having that situation under control. If you as a property manager gave that information to the owner without permission of the tenant screening company in violation of your terms of agreement, and if you didn't get the tenant's approval, then you are exposing yourself to very, very serious charges, and you may be the only one standing when the judge lets the owner off the hook because he didn't know, he hired you, the licensed professional, to make it right. The tenant screening company is going to throw you under the bus because you didn't follow their terms of agreement. You'll be the only one standing in this lawsuit. So if you're going to do this, it's okay. You gotta cross every T, dot every I to make it work just right. So one of the questions we have students asking all the time is, How do I get owner approval and denial? How do I satisfy the owner's need to have some control over approval and denial of applications that come in? And we've got a whole 6-8 page document on this because we did this at Crown for 35 years. And there's ways to do it, ways not to do it that can keep you out of trouble. So I'm just going to go over a quick list, but you'll find it on our website. So let's go through it together. Number 1, don't mention any gender or marital status. It would be kind of dumb to say to an owner in some kind of document, Mr. and Mrs. John Smith. Number 1, their name isn't important. Number 2, you've just identified that they're married, and one is a male and one is a female. And that'll get you in all kinds of trouble. You don't need to do that. You can not give them their credit score. Now that just changed recently. You may be able to, but we give a credit score range. We say the tenant, you can do it one of two ways. You can either say the tenant is qualified under our credit requirements. That's probably the safest way to do it. You can also say the tenant's credit score is between 600 and 625. So either of those ways will be satisfactory, but you don't want to give them the credit score. Next, number of kids. You can give them a number of children, but you don't need to give them their ages. You don't need to tell them whether they're their children or their grandchildren or their nieces and nephews, or whether or not they dragged the kids off the street and abducted them. All you should say is 2 adults, 3 children. So be careful what you give, information you give the owner, because you can be dragged in a case of facilitating discrimination if you don't do this just right. Okay. Next item is, you might want to say in this document, they meet our qualifying standards. In other words, you don't have to ask the owner if they approve. You can just say they meet our qualifying standards, either for employment, residency, and credit. And so we've got a whole document put together. Gives you the exact language, 2 or 3 different ways to do it, some samples of how other companies do it, and we would encourage you to go to our site and get that information. So, myth number 6, there's under no circumstances can I pass the tenant's information over to the owner. And is that right? And of course we know that that's wrong. There is a way to do it. It requires some very meticulous work. Most of us don't want to go there, but if you need to, there's a way to get it done. Now, we would encourage you to go to trainingpropertymanagers.com, go to our documents section. There's a section called CYA Documents for Owners, and you'll find that package in there about what is the right way and the wrong way to get the owner engaged in the approval process. Well, we hope this has been helpful to you. Thank you for taking the time to hang out with us. There's a bunch more of this on our site, and we're just now launching our cashing in on property management part of the site. So thanks for hanging out with us. Come back and see us again soon.